This episode takes us back in time into MySpace era, times where if you need a tool, you had to build this yourself. This is Confluent Developer.
That was one of those spots where it didn't exist yet, so we built our own. The biggest thing that taught me was you don't have to get everything right the first time. Fail fast, figure out what your problem is, and then keep moving on from there.
Welcome back to this episode of Confluent Developer Podcast. My name is Viktor Gamov, and I will be your host today. And today I have a very special guest. Every guest in this show is special, but this one is truly something. And you will understand by the end of this episode why I'm saying this. Jeremy Custenborder, the legend of Kafka Connect, and we're going to talk about this. Jeremy, welcome to Confluent Developer.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to finally reconnect after many years that I haven't seen you in person. I've seen you all over like internets and LinkedIn and other places, but it's finally good to be with you on the same room and talk about some cool tech stuff.
Of course, I missed you, man.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know Jeremy, can you tell us, like in few words, what you do and like how people can know you?
Yeah, so I'm an engineer like a lot of y'all. I worked at Confluent. I originally joined Confluent in 2016 and worked till 2022. I'm the type of person that I'd say I worked in the field, and that worked out pretty well for me because I have a short attention span.
Yeah.
So it's like I go from problem to problem to problem, and I enjoyed that. I had a great time working here, and it's fun to be back chatting with y'all.
Yeah, and Confluent Developer Podcast, this is the show where we exploring origins of this technical excellence and how the luminaries or some like visionaries and some very cool people and some awesome nerds came to be, and like what how they started and how they end up in the things. And one of the first questions that I like to ask people is, what was your first job? Not necessarily related to technology, not necessarily related to software. What was your first time when you get this kind of like a crispy like a bill or maybe like a few coins and stuff like that? Depends when you started and what was the rate of inflation at that time.
Well, I mean, my absolute first job was I was a paper boy from 10 to 16.
Nice.
And like I had that down pretty well. And that was a great job. And I made $100 a month.
$100 a month.
$100 a month. That was and like that money went in and then went immediately back out.
Yeah, you probably could afford lots of candies and some other interesting entertainment.
Exactly, but I mean, like that would be the 90s. Mm-hmm. So
you
little bit better.
You can go. Yeah, you can do a lot with $100 a month in the 90s. I guess.
And then my first real IT job, I used to be the network administrator for the Greene County Library System.
Okay.
In Ohio.
Okay, so tell us about this. What year it was? What was the network landscape at that time? Like what kind of like hardware, software things you were working with? Tell us everything.
Oh, it was a blast. So what I loved about this organization is I was one of the first people I think that was nice.
Okay.
It was like, you're working for a bunch of grandmothers.
Yes.
And, they would be freaked out if they broke a computer. And, I'm in this phase in my life, and, this is like 98, so I'm 18 years old.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to college. I'm self-taught. So, I'm in this like playground that had a decent budget. I had 400 machines that I administrated with T1 connections between buildings, and I had I had a decent budget, and it was like a great place to learn because
was it like a Windows machines, Linux machines?
All Windows machines.
Windows machines. Yeah,
and so it was great from the perspective of that things weren't perfect, so that you could make a lot of improvements. So and then the other part with that is you're working for all these grandmas.
Yes.
And, so it was great for me because, I wasn't living on my own at 18 and, it's not like that job paid that great.
Yeah.
And so I would say, hey, I'm going to be coming in to work on y'all's computers on, Tuesday. I show up and there's all these baked goods. It was amazing. It was amazing. So you're working for all these grandmothers.
So you have like incentives, maybe not with the monetary, but at least you will be well fed, and you had the dose of sugar that was the homemade cookie is the best.
Yes. And the cool part about that is like I had enough time where I could work and learn stuff, and that's where I wrote my first programs.
What was the language you used first time?
First time was ASP.NET.
Okay, nice.
So the first portion of my career was pretty heavily Windows based.
Yeah, me too. I also after I get my first job in the Russian like bank called Sberbank. I started learning .NET. Yeah. Yes, I learned .NET, and surprisingly, not to. I didn't go PHP route because lots of folks from my school went to PHP route. I went actually ASP.NET as well. Yeah. It was version .NET 2.0. So it just came out.
I spent a lot of time with that later on. Yeah. So I did that for a while, and I wrote. We basically had these CD-ROMs with like genealogy things on it, and so you could come in and do research on genealogy in one group. So I put something together to help searching and help kind of find which CDs had what for folks.
Nice.
And that was the first thing I ever wrote.
Yeah. So basically, you're the classical 3-tier application, right? You have a front end, you have a application server, which is probably what the Internet Information Server, right, and the database.
Yeah. Well, I mean, man, it's one of those deals. In those days, it didn't compile. Where I would say just it compiles, ship it.
That was pretty cool. My first .NET application was first complex application. It was attempt to implement kind of like a trading system. I thought okay, so I was working in the bank as my internship program during the summertime. I was like, okay, so what about kind of like I write the training application? So it also compiled, but my demo when I went to show this to this like a committee of the professors and stuff like that, only ran on my laptop. Obviously, so runs on my laptop. So that's how. And also
and now we know where we got Docker from.
Yeah, exactly. So you started you already mentioned that you self-taught. You learned these technologies basically on your own time, on your own pace, and looks like you also was very interested. One of the things what we like to discuss is the biggest professional challenge. Like I know you from probably it was you can think about this. It's really was complex challenge to find the ways to bring the virtually any data source in the world into Kafka, and we will talk about this. I really want to talk about this, but on your opinion, something that you would be super proud or super embarrassed if it's like some of the complex tasks that you solved, like so the biggest challenge of your life, like today, or something that you kind of like underestimated your power and it's like, it didn't work out, but still I learned a lot. So that's where I want to talk about.
Yeah. So if I had to go there, I will tell you probably the place I learned the most, and this is going to age me. It's definitely going to age me.
Try me.
Yeah. So I was around Ohio for a while, and then just at some point I decided like I gotta get out of Ohio, and so like I went to I went out west, and then I ended up in LA. And I ended up working for MySpace, the social network, and I did that for 5 years.
Nice.
And so,
for those of you kids,
exactly,
who don't know what the MySpace is something like Facebook also ages because kids are not using Facebook these days. They're probably using TikTok or something like that. But before Facebook was a thing, there was a MySpace.
Exactly. And I worked on that. So, and the fun part about that is like, when you talk to folks, they would say like, okay, we needed to have a caching tier.
Yeah.
They're like, well, why didn't you use Redis?
Yeah.
And it's like, go look at the first commits on Redis. That was
not existing.
like 5 years after. I think Redis was built in 2010. I'd have to go look.
But before that there was a Memcache.
We had to have one in Memcache came out in like 2007 or 2008.
I think it's even came up for this type of like applications. They start popping up the like initial wave of Web 2.0, kind of like what we know today as web scale things. And I think the Memcache was also around that time, around 2000s.
Yeah, but that was one of those spots where it didn't exist yet, so we built our own, and we were running monstrous scale on Windows machines. Which and actually making great numbers. So you were talking about your ASP.NET 2.0.
Yeah,
that was mine. That's what we were working on. It was the whole web front end was ASP.NET 2.0.
What was the? I guess right now probably it would be like a small numbers, but at that time, what was the profile of load? Like how many daily users of the platform?
Now a quick word from our sponsor. Confluent Developer, the podcast, is brought to you by Confluent Developer, the website, which has everything you need as a developer of data streaming systems. And it's completely free. We've got curriculum, hands-on exercises, executable tutorials, the online data streaming engineer certification, also free, a way to find a meetup near you, those are free. Everything is there. I really want you to be successful in your journey as a data streaming engineer, and this is the site that has what you need. Check it out at developer.confluent.io. That's developer.confluent.io. Now back to the show.
Well, when I joined, they had about 10 million users and was pushing about, I want to say at that time about 2 or 3 gigabits a second from their data centers. And then when I left, we had 320 million, if I remember right, users, and they were pushing a terabit from their data centers.
So what was about, we live in 2025, we have a great deal of open source technologies available for building stuff because of this era of web scale. But if we, back in time, what was the biggest challenges apart from what we already discussed with the with caching, probably like a load balancing would be sharding of databases and stuff.
So much has changed, and just for example, everybody uses Kubernetes now. There was nothing like that, and then Kubernetes can do like a slow rollout and handle all the health checks, and we had to build everything around that. So all of these was stitching things like NetScalers and other components together to get that type of functionality. And today I look at what you have and it's amazing. Yeah. And then we were moving files around, and that's how you would do deployments. And you would image machines by setting up monstrous multicast groups and sending tons of image traffic down to machines.
Like
and that's
how we
VSX
or something like that, right? Or not even that.
No, it's all bare metal.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and then at the end, it was right around when AWS was starting to come up. We were also running Zen as well and virtualizing instead of patching, we would just swap out machines.
Yeah, wow, that was pretty cool time. So what this time taught you about data? That's the question that I'm trying to slowly slide into.
I mean, I'll tell you the biggest thing that taught me was you don't have to get everything right the first time. It's so you need to have good principles around storing your data, but you can increment and you can add on and you can do more at a later time. It doesn't. Before I'd say that's right around the time agile development started kind of adopting. Yeah, it's fail fast, figure out what your problem is, and then keep moving on from there.
So, you said how long you've been in the MySpace?
I was there for 5 years.
So I think this is one of the things that I heard from also former colleagues of us. Maybe we need to get him on this podcast as well eventually. Shriram Subramanian. He mentioned one of the things that these days you can put on resume whatever you want, and it's kind of like should be a little bit alarming for some of the hiring managers when you have like a distributed systems engineer in your resume and you only spent like 1 year in each company. So there's not enough time to you to be like a fully solidify as a distributed systems engineer if you not went through the multiple iterations of the same product.
Oh yeah.
Like there is a joke or maybe semi-joke when the people saying that if you're not embarrassed for the first version of your product, you probably doing something wrong.
100%.
So that's aligned with what you just said. Kind of like you don't have to do everything right the first time, but you have you need to know that you need to iterate and learn from this and how you can do this better next time. So that's why idea of relieving multiple major versions when you do constantly swapping, not constantly, but you swapping stack every like 2 years. Mm-hmm. You saw that something works, technology of the time works. After 2 years, there will be totally different landscape. That there might be some of the problems that you try to solve that someone else would solve. Like that's 100%. How we end up having Nginx instead of Apache for web front end. This is how we ended up having some other like a lighter like HTTP load balancers in front of instead of like having some vendor based load balancers and things like that. So.
It's funny, I go back and I look at like how many uses of Kafka I would have had there.
Yeah.
It would have been insane.
Yeah.
And then if you look at hey, how would you do things now?
Mm-hmm.
Like metrics, we built our own.
Yeah.
Well, Prometheus is pretty amazing. Why don't you use that?
Yeah, but it was not there anymore.
None of those things existed. And the other thing I got from that was a good understanding of how to do production debugging. Mm-hmm. And you kind of get a lot of principles. So one of my jobs was kind of being an SRE before that.
SRE was the word? Yeah.
Yeah.
System administrator. That's how that was called that time. Like call Jeremy, Jeremy's just like showing up for cookies and like doing something with fixing the thing.
It was fun. I mean, you get in these spots where like all of these charts go red, and then you got to go figure out, hey, what's the problem? And we learned a lot, and it was a great team. And I had that similar experience, and like working at Confluent, you just had a great team where you all have the same goal, and you're there to help each other and win.
Yeah, and I think interesting thing when you have this mentality where those things were not existing, so you had to build yourself. And when I started learning Kafka, it was around 2000, maybe 17, 16. We had the product that was similar to do stream processing at Hazelcast that time. And I would start looking how to get data. And there was already availability of different ways how I can get data in.
Yeah.
But you came a little bit earlier, and you didn't have this luxury. And again, bring back this mentality that I didn't have these tools, I need to build those tools. So you went up and built some of the very popular connectors.
Yeah. So, when I joined Confluent, the only products that Confluent had at that point that wasn't Apache Kafka was Schema Registry. Mm-hmm. And so, and I believe we had the JDBC connector and the HDFS connector, and I think that was the entire product stack. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I was one of the first folks in the field, and so I'd end up talking to a customer, and a lot of it would be like, man, if I can get data from this and then do this to it and put it in that, we'll actually be able to get this into production. And so for me, I was like, okay, the short attention span kicks in, and I'm like, all right, I like this quick tactical deployment.
Waiting in the boarding in the airplane, and you have a time when you can have a snack and open laptop and start.
Yeah, I actually used to do that a lot because I've lived in Austin except for like 3 months that I worked at Confluent. I've lived in Austin, and I used to have to come out here to the Bay all the time. So what I would do is I'd meet with the customer, find out what they needed to do. Okay, pull down the Docker containers.
Yeah.
And then work on it on the flight home.
Yeah.
And usually I could get, I like to say it compiles, ship it.
Yeah.
I could get that quality usually by the time I got home.
Yeah.
And then, hey, Mr. Customer, play with this. Does this kind of like what you're trying to do?
Yeah.
And then that's really where a lot of it came from. Is I wanted to help people. I wanted them to be successful.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, I wanted Confluent to grow and be successful.
Yeah.
And the easiest thing for me is, if you've ever talked to me before, I'm always pushing everything has to be Avro, everything blah 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 blah. But in a lot of cases, people don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the connector ecosystem let me focus on the system.
Yeah.
So I just need to get data out of this system and
into connector format.
Yep, and into a struct format.
Yeah, struct
and then I hand it off, and customer can say, "Hey, I don't want your Avro. I want to use JSON," and it's all transparent.
Yeah, because you can configure converter, and after that, it will be handled by Kafka Connect ecosystem.
Yeah, and so that worked out perfect for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started building them and then putting them out on my GitHub.
Yeah.
And then for a while, I used to directly publish them to Confluence a registry.
Yeah, but the registry was years after, kind of we realized that having App Store for connectors, it's not only beneficial for company to kind of have a sort of taxonomy, but also beneficial for people to search them.
Yeah.
And have a little bit assurance that if it was in the part of some marketplace or some sort of a connectors hub, there would be some assurance that it was at least tested. It's not only kind of compile, ship it, but also it was tested and validated by kind of reputable vendor. So I would say that was huge help for people to understand having this registry. And I think that time was your connectors, and there was the Data Mountaineers connectors.
Yeah.
They were building.
Yeah, they did a great job.
Yeah. So there was a huge ecosystem of different data sources that would definitely benefit for bringing data from the sources into Kafka in order to enable some other use cases. So during this, what was your favorite connector to build? What was the most exciting, or something that maybe closed the biggest deal in that time? Maybe.
Oh man, you caught me off guard with that. See, you didn't send me questions ahead of time.
You didn't ask which of your kids you love more, Viktor. My favorite was Twitter connector. Before Twitter was kind of free social network, Twitter connector was great because it was able to enable such a great demos.
But you had to be brave to do a live Twitter demo.
Yeah. I love this doing it.
Sorry, but I don't trust y'all internet.
And I was doing this in Russia, where the audience is wired to be kind of let's see how we can break this stuff, how we can create some malicious thing. So the Twitter connector was great, but it was great because I was using specific hashtag, so I would capture some activities, and they're saying, "Hey, you see, the people were having a blast during my talk," and it's actually a great demonstration of what's the streaming data, how this would look like.
100%, 100%. Yeah, I mean that one was a fun one. The syslog one, that one was a lot of fun. I tend to like a lot of network admin type things. And so I always wanted to do I never had the opportunity to do it, but I always wanted to do a large scale network monitoring project using Kafka. That was one thing that I never got the opportunity to do. But I did build some of that and some NetFlow collection stuff. I liked building and implementing protocols, doing some of those.
Yeah.
The file system connector, that one opened a lot of doors.
The file system, not the one that was available in open source, or
correct. The Spoolder connector. Yeah. So that one was a lot of fun, and because that one was fun for me because I always if you ever talk to me as a customer, I was always everything's got to be Avro. And I didn't like that, the other connectors out there wouldn't let me get things in with a strong type. And so, that one if you would use my kind of messed up idea of a schema, you could apply schema to data as you put in. And that ended up being used pretty heavily.
Yeah, awesome. So Jeremy, if you would summarize like everything that you learn over the time and already see kind of like there's one of the things that we already talk about is kind of like it's not has to be like a perfect and the first step. Maybe some advice for people who listen to us. Like I don't want to sound like two old dudes sitting here just in my times blah blah blah. We still teaching the technology of the future. There's still huge the cluster of the people who would love to learn things about Kafka Connect, stream processing, and all this kind of thing. So maybe some advice for those type of listeners.
I would say design principles that I like to live by is if you can't explain your idea to another engineer in less than 5 minutes, it's too complex and needs to be broken up. And that's something I like to live by. The thing I will tell you throughout my career I've seen, and in some of the big environments I've worked in, simplicity scales. And the other thing to keep in mind, you don't have access to production. So make sure you have proper logging.
Yes.
And then also logging that you can turn up.
Yeah.
So like
sometimes info is not enough.
Exactly. So like it's okay if you look throughout my connectors, I would use trace. And trace you shouldn't turn on in production because it could it's going to put a ton out there and it could dump some data.
Yeah.
Debug is going to say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, and I did that. But you need to love yourself.
Yeah.
And make sure that if I have to get this data, there's a way for me to get it. So like pushing a config change to production is a lot easier than pushing an entire new release.
And that was Jeremy Custenborder, ladies and gentlemen. Amazing person to talk to. And that was another great episode of Confluent Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Viktor Gamov, and as always, have a nice day.